that have supported the retreat today, either as presenters that you'll shortly be seeing or behind the scenes in a support role. But I would especially like to thank Brian Newman, CEETL's Communication and Outreach Specialist, who has been critical to the success of this event. Thank you. Dr. Dariotis?
Good morning. Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Hi, I'm Wei-Ming Dariotis, and I use she, her, hers pronouns. I am the faculty director of CEETL, the Center for Equity and Excellence in Teaching and Learning. I'm a professor of Asian American Studies and affiliate faculty with the Educational Leadership Doctoral Program. At the core of both CEETL and the Academic Senate are faculty and staff working together to support our community of teachers and learners. CEETL's mission is to function as the heart of the university's commitment to a culture that values and rewards teaching, supports diversity among learners, and promotes learning environments that foster social justice and the respectful and vigorous exchange of ideas, which sustains students and faculty to help them thrive and succeed. Why did the Academic Senate and CEETL decide together that the faculty retreat this year needed to center on how to be an anti-racist university? Because the events of the past year, and especially the past month, have led us to realize that no matter what job you do at SF State, you need to do it with an explicit commitment to finding ways to heal past wounds, to repay educational debts, and to speak truth to power. I will paraphrase Ibram Kendi, in whose book title we found the title of today's event. The opposite of being racist isn't being not racist. It's being explicitly and actively anti-racist. To quote a poem, I suspect many of us are on the verge of memorizing, the words of the new poet laureate, 22-year-old Amanda Gorman. We did not feel prepared to be the heirs of such a terrifying hour, but within it, we found the power to author a new chapter, to offer hope and laughter, which is a sentiment that certainly resonates as we begin this new semester. As we saw yesterday, purple is the color of women's liberation and empowerment, and in this political moment also symbolizes unity. In our San Francisco context, purple also symbolizes queerness and positive transgression. At SF State, let us wear our purple for social justice, for liberation pedagogy, and to stand for our blended community that finds strength in our diversity.
So the event today will go from broad to more specific. We start with a land acknowledgement by Greg Castro of the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone People. At the CSU and university level, we have a conversation between Chancellor Castro and President Mahoney. This will be preceded by comments from Provost Summit. Now, if time allows, there'll be an opportunity for audience members to ask questions at the end of President Mahoney and Chancellor Castro's discussion through the Q&A function that you can find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. Subsequently, there will be a panel of representatives from each college that will be facilitated by Assistant Vice President of the Division of Equity and Community Inclusion, Dr. Fred Smith. Finally, we will transition to working groups on more specific topics focused on how to be an anti-racist university. Thank you.
How we achieve becoming an anti-racist university is just as important as succeeding in this goal. And to that end, while we work together today, and indeed as we work together this year, let us abide by the following community norms. CEETL is committed to fostering an inclusive teaching and learning environment and asks participants to engage in respectful dialogue. We ask that you recognize your own positionality, both institutional as well as personal, in relationship to others, that you consider the impact of your words regardless of your intentions, that you respond from a place of curiosity rather than judgment by asking open-ended questions, that you continue engagement towards truth and reconciliation when possible, despite the difficulty of the dialogue, and that you commit to the ongoing health and safety of the larger learning community. It is now my privilege to introduce Mr. Greg Castro, representative of the Ramaytush Ohlone Peoples Association, who will lead us in an acknowledgement that the land SF State occupies is Ramaytush Ohlone land, sponsored by the SFSU Alumni Association.
Tuhi, in the indigenous language of my Ramaytush ancestors who have been in the San Francisco Peninsula since time immemorial. Greetings, relatives. Thank you for having me here. My name is Greg Castro, and I'm an indigenous California person of the Ramaytush and Rumsen Ohlone and Total Celine tribal communities. And I'm principal cultural consultant to the tribal chair of the Association of Ramaytush Ohlone People, Jonathan Cordero. I am humbled and honored to be asked to give proper respect and acknowledgement to my Ramaytush Ohlone ancestors and relatives in the homeland called Yalamo in ancient times. Hayene Hersha Pesha Walrap Ramaytush Ohlone. Welcome to the homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone people. Although our ancestors were the first victims of colonial gentrification in the peninsula many generations ago, the Ramaytush people have never ceded, lost, nor forgotten their ancient responsibilities and obligations to be caretakers of their original homelands and the land that gave us birth and still sustains us in spiritual and physical ways, what we now call San Francisco. For California indigenous people, their sacred obligations as caretakers given to us by Creator when she gave us our homelands to be born into have never been relinquished nor extinguished. Our ancestors sacrificed greatly, even to the point of giving their very lives, so that we, their heirs, could continue to fulfill our obligations and sacred responsibilities to steward the homelands all the way into modern times of today. On behalf of the Ramaytush Ohlone relatives, I ask all of you that are guests in our homeland, or in wherever lands you currently reside, that you take up these same responsibilities, these same obligations and sacred commitments to take care of the land and each other. Because we make no separations about those things in our ancient ways. It is all connected, it is all together. How we treat each other is how we treat the land, is how we treat ourselves. So our obligation in gratitude for the land that we've been given, for the life that we've been given, whatever form it is, needs to be upheld and then shared with each other. We can choose to make that choice. It is up to each one of us to do that. But in the choice that we make, we must remember that we are the descendants of people that have sacrificed for us. In our ancient traditions, we are taught to be grateful for that gift we've been given of life and of land and of whatever choices that we do have, all being gifts. So please use your gifts of choice wisely. Thank you very much for having me here.
Thank you very much, Mr. Castro. Deeply appreciate that. It is my honor to introduce the Provost of San Francisco State University, Dr. Jennifer Summit.
Thank you, Jackson. And I want to acknowledge with gratitude both you and Wei-Ming Dariotis for organizing this timely retreat. The question of how to be an anti-racist university feels more urgent than ever today. Even as we celebrated yesterday's inauguration, just 2 weeks ago, the insurrection of January 6th was both a wake-up call and, for many, a confirmation of what they already knew and feared. That many white Americans, as Black theologian Brian Massingale put it, would rather live in a white dictatorship than in a multiracial democracy. In many ways, we are the caretakers of democracy. This is what the CSU's founders believed. In 1939, when white supremacy threatened democracy in Europe, One system administrator, J. Herschel Coffin, insisted that California's state colleges, as we were then called, were better prepared than any institution in the nation to uphold what he termed the spirit of democracy because of our egalitarian social values. In contrast, he faulted the UC for its aristocratic mindset. In 1968, San Francisco State showed the system and the nation that racial equity was critical to democracy and that achieving it would take radical change, starting with the university itself. Today's retreat invites us to reaffirm our commitment to the core value of multiracial democracy and to the hard and ongoing work it asks of us. So how can we be an anti-racist university? I believe it starts with the very terms that CEETL unites in its name, equity and excellence. Pairing them asserts a profound claim that equity and excellence belong together. The dominant paradigm assumes the opposite. We can have excellence or equity, but not both. As long as educational excellence is viewed as a privilege and not a right, a private and not a public good, it becomes exclusive, an aristocratic value, not a democratic one. By contrast, at the celebration of our strike's 50th anniversary, alumnus Danny Glover challenged us to embrace radical inclusiveness as our institutional purpose. Or to put it in the words of alumna Rebecca Solnit, to work for a society in which everyone is important. Inclusive excellence is easy to say, but it's humblingly difficult to achieve. Yet, our students so often tell us that they find it here, where faculty make their classrooms places of welcome as well as high-level engagement, of challenge as well as support. It's also a goal that we can never stop trying to reach by actively tracking how our students are succeeding and by asking how our practices and systems can advance our goals even further. As Ibram X. Kendi writes in the book that gives this retreat its name, self-critique allows change. Kendi's book, How to Be an Anti-Racist, challenges us to recognize that racism is a system and one that's been for too long bound up with the educational system itself. In Kendi's powerful analysis, racism manifests as an inequitable distribution of resources, opportunities, and support that shape the conditions in which students learn. Perniciously, this systemic inequity comes disguised as the aptitude, achievement, or failure of individuals or groups, rather than the effects of social systems and power, of institutional underfunding on the one hand, or on the other, of what economist Richard Reeves calls opportunity hoarding by white families of privilege. This is why Kendi insists that we change the way we think about student success itself, starting with the terms we use. Here at San Francisco State, we are striving to eliminate the gap in graduation rates between white students and students of color, which currently stands at nearly 10 percentage points. When we call this an achievement gap, we project it onto students. When we call it an opportunity gap, we recognize its racist origins and open the possibility for change. Here at San Francisco State, the Black Lives Matter movement has galvanized many of our departments to take action, like our English department, which has pledged, quote, to change our courses, our curriculum, and our classrooms, regardless of modality, to address the injustice of this particular moment and of a longer history of racism. This approach goes against the grain of how many of us were trained as graduate students. In isolation from other fields within our disciplines, let alone from others, we were discouraged from asking how our courses connect with others to form a larger curriculum, how our curricula connect with our historical moment, and how courses, curriculum, and classrooms connected can address and intervene in the histories of racism of which we are all a part. Insisting on this interconnection, as the English department is doing, changes everything. If racism is a system, anti-racism demands a systemic perspective, starting with questioning what we do and why it matters. Other departments are following similar lines of inquiry and action. The College of Ethnic Studies is examining course-taking patterns in students of color who persist. The College of Science and Engineering is asking how equity-centered curricula encourage retention. The Lamb Family College of Business is redesigning courses to address racial disparities in grading. The College of Health and Social Sciences is exploring how pedagogy advances inclusivity. And the Graduate College of Education is asking how it can diversify its enrollment and the future teachers it prepares. This is powerfully transformative work, and it shows that a commitment to anti-racism isn't an add-on. It changes us at our core. Before he wrote How to Be an Anti-Racist, Kendi's first book was about the Black campus movement, whose ultimate aim, he writes, was to revolutionize higher education. Of course, San Francisco State plays a prominent role in both the book and the movement it records, of which we can be rightly proud. But Kendi also points out that that revolution is unfinished. And I believe that its next chapter may be written here, just as its first chapter was. In 1968, the strike called for relevant education that engages our students with the realities of a world that urgently needs their leadership. It's a call that bears constant self-renewal. What does relevant education look like for this age of our shaken democracy? I'm inspired by our department's self-reflections to believe that there's no better place to ask the question than here. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today. It's now my distinct honor to introduce President Lynn Mahoney and Chancellor Joseph Castro in conversation about how to be an anti-racist university.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thank you for those remarks. It is absolutely wonderful to see, and I'm using that in quotes, so many people here today. I think the participant list is up to 378. It is just remarkable, and I am deeply grateful for all the time that people are devoting to this. And I want to start by giving the warmest welcome to the 8th Chancellor of the California State University system, my colleague, my boss, and my friend, Joe Castro. It is such a pleasure to have you here today, Chancellor Castro.
Thank you, President Mahoney. It's a pleasure to be with you and with all of our colleagues at San Francisco State.
The Chancellor and I were remembering that the last event he traveled to and the last event we hosted was here at San Francisco State. So I know I speak for everyone here when I say we can't wait to welcome you back on campus. I chose my background this morning purposefully because I know that this is where we would all rather be with all of those students behind us. So again, thank you, Chancellor Castro, for joining us. This has been the most tumultuous 21 first days of a year. It started on a high with incredible historic news out of Georgia. And then of course, with a historic low with the insurrection at the Capitol building. And then yesterday was a tremendous day. In 24 hours, we've seen the travel ban repealed. We've seen DACA protections restored. We have seen the moratorium on the repayment of federal loans extended. And we have seen, and then this directly addresses much of what we'll talk about today, the repeal of the executive order barring diversity training. So yesterday was quite a big day. So in that context, Chancellor Castro, I'll start with just the big question. in this very complex and volatile socio-political climate, what do you see the role of public higher education to be?
Thank you. It has been quite a wild ride for all of us. And I have to say, yesterday, it felt like fresh air coming across the country. And like you, I was applauding the changes that happened just in the first day. And I'm very hopeful about the future, though I know it's going to be challenging. I believe that the last several months reaffirm the importance of universities, of education, of K through 12, of community colleges, of universities in our society. I think this might be one of the most consequential times for the CSU, certainly in my lifetime, and perhaps beyond that. And I think it's the case because we have the opportunity to serve our students even more effectively, and to do that in partnership with all of our colleagues while they're facing so many challenges. This is a moment in time where, and you've written about this, I know, in the San Francisco papers, this is a time for students to lean into their education. And I am concerned about those who are feeling hopeless and who are scared. And so, for me, I think we have such important roles to play in supporting each of the students that we serve, and our colleagues as well. And in the process, elevating our country and making it better and stronger for the future.
Thank you. You've had such a distinguished career in the University of California, which our provost just described as someone else's description as aristocratic, and an incredible success as the president of Fresno State, and our native California, and the first Mexican-American chancellor of the system. How have your personal and educational experiences shaped the way that you think about an anti-racist educational experience or system?
Yeah, I've been listening very carefully this morning to the presentations, and I'm learning, as I always do in these gatherings. I come with a perspective of first generation a college student, grandson of immigrants, son of a single mother, and for me, higher education has made the most powerful difference in my own life, and it's why I serve, and I know it's why you serve. You want to give that back. You want to pass that on to others. And I think I knew the moment that I was at UC Berkeley, I could feel my life changing. And I suppose that it was a racist university at the time. The way I experienced it, however, was in a very supportive manner. And the students that I met have become, the best of friends for me. It completely opened my mind to new ideas. It opened pathways for me. And so my experience in higher education has been, by and large, very positive. I wish that I had had more faculty who shared my own background along the way. And so as I approach this work, that's something that I very much want to encourage. And I know others are interested in that as well. How can we enhance the diversity of our faculty? Because I remember some of those moments where I did have faculty of color who became mentors for me and still are. And it's not that others could not be, because I've had mentors from all different groups, but that's just one example of where I do want to make more progress, because I think it will have a powerful difference in addressing, as the provost said, the opportunity gap that we face. I really want us to lean into that opportunity gap. And I do think that by doing so, we can be intentional, as another speaker said, explicitly and intentionally anti-racist as we formulate our policies and initiatives and work together so that the CSU, including San Francisco State, reflects the the rich diversity of the communities that we serve.
I've given a lot of thought to trying to experience some of the obstacles we put inadvertently in students' place, in front of students. And obviously there were big challenges, for example, like an aggressive hiring strategy so that we have a faculty and administration that better reflects our students. But even things, for example, like complex processes and financial aid. I'm struck by on the campus level that's something that how different students experience that differentially. And students for whom this is a bigger reach or who have had to work harder to get here, an obstacle like, for example, difficulty in getting financial aid can make the difference. Did you experience any of those obstacles or see either as a student or in your career at Fresno or in the UCs, some of the barriers that we inadvertently place upon students and the challenges those pose?
Absolutely, yes, President Mahoney. I was a student who received, Cal Grant B, Pell Grants, work study. I borrowed some. I tried to keep that to a modest level, but I did have to borrow some from time to time. And I worked all along the way. And I remember standing in lines for financial aid and standing in lines for registration. Those were definitely barriers. And I've seen those at different times throughout my career. And, at Fresno State, for example, we had 85%, I think, of our students receiving some kind of financial aid. So making sure that office worked well was a high priority for me. And I know it is for you. And making sure all of our services are accessible, and especially right now during a pandemic, accessible through virtual means, and to the extent it has to be in person, doing that safely. Absolutely, and that experience of being food insecure, that really inspired me to want to do more as president of Fresno State and chancellor, to address the basic needs of our students. And I know how much you care about that as well, to try to make sure that we support them in that way. And I'm encouraged by the governor's budget, including new dollars in those areas as well, because I was using mostly private money at Fresno State, and I know we have received a little bit of state money, but it's very encouraging to see that the governor and the legislature are on board with those ideas, because if our students are food insecure, then it just makes it harder for them to experience a CSU in a positive way.
Absolutely. I had an interesting conversation with an alumna of ours about she was unable to pursue the major she wanted to here because of our inflexible scheduling. She was a single mom and did not have the flexibility. So I think sometimes we inadvertently, again, some of this is intentional, but it's a lot of the unintentional things that I think that we have to examine, the way that Wei Ming encouraged us to at the beginning, very explicitly, intentionally, and aggressively.
I agree.
As you think about what it means to be an anti-racist university or an anti-racist university system, how do you see that?
It's a great question, and I'm always learning. I'm humbled by what I learn each day in this job and the other jobs that I've had. But I think for me, my mother really gave me the gift of embracing people from all different cultures. So I grew up with that philosophy in my home, and she continues to be that kind of person now. And so I think I have had the natural instincts to always look for the barriers that exist as an administrator and to try to remove those. I remember one that sticks out for me at Fresno State was, I learned one day, it was probably a year into my presidency, and you probably know this feeling, somebody told me that, we were basically dismissing students who owed us $301 or more. And I said, "You've got to be kidding me. Are we really doing this?" And somebody had decided that years before, and it just continued. And we would routinely dismiss, many hundreds, if not more, for that kind of money. And obviously, once I learned that, I, mobilized a team and we changed that policy and we started providing grants to take care of those small balances and to help keep students in class and in school and help them graduate. I mean, to dismiss a senior, for example, who owed $301. So I know those kinds of things have existed in the past. I suppose it could have been racist at the time, or just could have been some random crazy rule that came up, and I don't understand it. But I think our jobs, Lynn, are to identify those with our colleagues, and if it's within our authority and responsibility, to remove those barriers. And to the extent it's not, then we advocate to get those changed, whether it's in Sacramento or Washington or some other body. But I think to be intentional about that at each of our campuses is really important. And for me as well, at the system-wide level, to support each of you in doing that and to make sure our system policies are inclusive and our hiring is inclusive at every single level.
The observation about the students dismissed for $301 is I think we have to ask of almost everything we do how our students experience it. One of my frustrations consistently is that conversations about higher ed almost are always driven by this kind of ideal residential college that's all full-time students, and they're the minority. That is actually the atypical college student. Our students are the typical college students. And so I think we have to interrogate everything we do by questioning how it is experienced by our students, who are largely first generation, lower income, students of color. And the answer will be a lot different than if you're interrogating it from the perspective of a largely white residential college.
That's right. I agree with you there. And you and I talked about this on the phone a few days ago, that sometimes for cultural reasons, a student may not tell you that they're suffering. And I remember, again, early days in Fresno around food insecurity, it was kind of under the radar. This was in 2013. And it wasn't until a graduate student came to me with documentation that she had interviewed students that they were struggling. That's when we moved on it. I was not hearing that routinely from students at the time. They were struggling in silence. And I think it was because they are the heroes in their families. Their families are struggling too, maybe even more. And they didn't want them to know, and they didn't want the university to know. And I'm so glad that we broke through that. And it wasn't until that was actually done where we had that breakthrough. So I think it's really important for us as faculty members and administrators and staff to be accessible in a way where students feel comfortable sharing. And I get the sense in San Francisco, you may have students that they're not holding back. I know you have this history of activism, but I know that some do, and I really do want us to be open and accessible so that we hear from them and we create the conditions where they feel like they can share that with us.
I shared a story with Chancellor Castro the other day. My son was a sophomore in college when I became a provost at Cal State LA. And we did not offer the students the services for financial aid in particular that we should have. And hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of students were negatively impacted. And if my son had experienced that, he would have called home quite unhappy, and I would have been angry and called somebody or sent an email. And the students at Cal State LA just suffered in silence. And I think Chancellor Castro, you're right. They are the greatest success stories in their communities. They don't want to complain. They want to succeed. And we were failing them. And so we had to be proactive and engage on their behalf. So that's a good observation. How do you think the CSU is uniquely poised to achieve social justice and anti-racism. And I, Jennifer Summit, I have never heard that story before, that quote from 1939. So it's interesting to see that that's, you know, almost 100 years ago, and we're still in the lead there, although obviously we haven't achieved it. So how do you think we are uniquely positioned to achieve, you know, become the model anti-racist university system?
Yeah, thank you. I'm very optimistic about this. I think we have the political conditions in California. We have, and I'm speaking of at the state level. I know that, you know, I came from Fresno where it was purple, let's say. But in California at the state level, we have progressive leadership, in my opinion, you know, governor, the legislature. We have new progressive leadership in Washington, D.C. And we are the largest, most diverse, most consequential public university in the country. And I think that we already model inclusion in such a powerful way, inclusive excellence in such a powerful way. And yet we all know that we have more work to do. I know San Francisco State has had this rich tradition of really blazing the trail in this area around social justice. And I want to commend the campus for doing that, because in many ways it set the standard, and you're doing so well. And yet you want to do better, and I want to do better as chancellor. So I think it's being, as speakers said earlier, being explicitly and intentionally not racist, and just aggressive about making changes when we know that they're not working anymore. You know, we have one legislative priority this year besides the budget in Sacramento, and that priority is to get more mental health funding for our students. And I've been talking to legislative leaders about this. I have not heard one member tell me that's a bad idea. And there's Prop 63 funding that's available, and that's what we're going to try to inspire the legislature and the governor to allocate for us, so that we don't have to go to the students as often and charge them a fee for this. And I know campuses do that all the time, but I'm really trying to be cognizant of that. And if we can get funding from some other place, then we'll do that. And I think that does illustrate our commitment. And another priority will be getting emergency grant funding for Dreamers, because so far the feds have not included them. I've been talking to legislative leaders about that, and that has momentum as well. And so I want to work with you, President Mahoney, and all of our colleagues across the system to identify those opportunities where we can get resources or change policies so that all of our students and faculty and staff will be able to thrive.
I know that there are a number of participants who'd love to ask you some questions. So let me just ask one last question, and then I'll turn this over to Jackson and Wei Ming to facilitate some questions. But and you've kind of answered it a little bit in what you just said. In 5 or 10 years, when you look back, when you are, you know, in 10 years when you're retired to Palm Springs or wherever it is you'd like to retire to, what would success look like here for you?
It's a great question. I think what I would say is I'd like our system to be even more successful than it is today in supporting our talented and diverse students. So I'd like to see those opportunity gaps go to zero. And I'd like to see our success rates in graduating our students continue to climb. You know, right now we're seeing the success rates going up, but the gap is stubborn right now for Pell students and for underrepresented students. And one of the things about a system, and I just saw a slide the other day, you know, some campuses have taken their underrepresented rates down to their gaps down to zero, but their Pell gap is still 9. And others like Fresno, where it's flipped, where the Pell gap is, you know, higher and the underrepresented is lower. So I think it's an opportunity for us to learn from each other. And So I'd like to see us do even better in that area. I'd like to see us grow as the state will enable us to, because I do think that there are areas of California that are still underrepresented in terms of students going on to higher education. I came from a region like that in the Central Valley, but there are other regions as well. So as it can be possible, I'd love for our 23 campuses to be able to accommodate more students over time, to use technology in a more strategic way, and capitalize on all the advances that exist there. And then I mentioned faculty diversity. I'd love to see us make dramatic progress in that area. And wouldn't it be wonderful to say, you know, our faculty reflect the rich diversity of our student body? We're making progress, but I'd love for that to actually, you know, happen. And maybe it can happen in the next 10 years. I'd love to see us try really hard to make that happen.
And of course, I note that this work actually happens on the campuses.
Absolutely.
Closing the opportunity gaps, hiring a bit more representative faculty. So I had been jotting down some notes about what it would look like for me in 10 years when I looked back, and they echo very much yours. A more representative faculty, staff, and administration, a closing of opportunity gaps, particularly things like completion rates in courses and graduation rates, and increasing access. And for us in San Francisco, there is an acute crisis in the city with the with our Black communities in terms of reduced numbers, lower graduation rates from high schools, lower attendance. So for us locally, that's an important part of this.
Absolutely.
Jackson and Wei Ming, may I turn this back to you for some Q&A with the Chancellor?
Certainly. Thank you so much for this vigorous discussion. So our first question is, does this radical inclusiveness fold the staff into the model? How does this complement the user-friendly principles, the university's mission statement, and the strategic planning initiative?
I would say absolutely yes. It includes all aspects of the university, including our vital staff. And I don't know about your local principals and so forth, but I am familiar with those in general. And at least in terms of my experience before I came here, I always spoke of the alignment needed between the mission and the priorities and principles of community and so forth. And you know, I would definitely continue to encourage all the campuses, including San Francisco State, to try to achieve that alignment so that the result is this radical inclusiveness.
Wei Ming, I would just add locally, we are finally going to see this semester the establishment of a staff council so that we can better integrate our staff into our shared governance structures. And that to me is an enormous step. And I'm very grateful to a number of staff who have pushed that. So absolutely, they're the backbone of the university in many ways. And yes, they do often get excluded. And so we have to create intentional structures to make sure that they are included.
Thank you. So as CSU with 23 campus, this huge system, we have a lot of weight. How do we use that networked full weight to move towards this goal of being anti-racist university rather than being 23 campuses pulling separately?
I love that question. It's such a fundamental question in terms of our system and the role of the chancellor. And I guess the way I look at it is, you know, one of my mentors shared this insight with me, and it's the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And he was a mathematician. This was Winston Dobie at UCLA. For those of you who may have known him, he was a pioneer in his own right. And that guides my thinking as chancellor. How can the system empower each of the 23 campuses in a way where, for example, at San Francisco State, you thrive and the way in which you thrive might be a little different than at another campus. But as each of the 23 campuses thrive, it does so in a way where our system is stronger, and it elevates California as the largest state in the country, and it elevates and supports our nation as the largest university system in the country. I'm not sure our identity as a system is as clearly communicated and understood as it could be. And I'm going to be talking to the presidents about that. Is there a way in which that can be done so that each campus can thrive in a more effective way, and our system would be recognized as one that might be more powerful and influential, especially as I think about influencing policy in Sacramento and Washington that will help us to be even stronger and a leader in our country.
I would only add that I think that this last graduation initiative, and I know that people have different responses to it, I actually do think was a major step forward in bringing us together and using our cloud as a system. We've done a little bit before, but most campuses were doing their own graduation rate initiatives, and they had success, and every success is wonderful. But when you add us together, we're transformative. And I think we saw the results of this in that governor's last budget, in the governor's current budget proposal. I think we now have a recognition of being the heavy lifters in this state when it comes, with due respect to the UCs, who I think do a pretty good job for the institutions that they are, but we do the heavy lift here for this state. And I think we see that, and I think we saw that recognition in the governor's most recent budget. So I think it's an excellent question about using our weight as a collective whole.
Our next question is about students with balances owed. Are there exceptions and financial arrangements being made for them at SF State this semester, or this year?
So what we implemented during the pandemic and have continued is that students are not disenrolled for non-payment. They're just not disenrolled. Instead, we ask them, and we can't tell when someone hasn't paid if they're struggling to find money or if in fact they're walking away from the university. So what we do is we've now asked students to, if you're not returning, to voluntarily withdraw yourself. And obviously our advisors are working on retaining our students the best we can, and our faculty are. But so no, we're not currently disenrolling. And what we do then is we actively try to help the student pay down their outstanding funds. So it doesn't affect them for one semester. So we are currently not disenrolling for any non-payment.
So thank you earlier for the comments about food insecurity. The question was around the issue of stigma, and how do we reduce stigma for folks who are food insecure in receiving food?
I learned a lot about this. I have learned a lot about this, continue to learn a lot about it. We actually in Fresno did focus groups with students, and we did it in a way where I felt like they shared insights about how we could reduce stigma, eliminate stigma. And we followed their advice there. And I'll give you one example. They said to us, we don't want to see other students employed at the cupboard when we go to get our food. And so we made sure to be thoughtful about that. They wanted to make sure it was accessible on the campus and had the hours necessary, had the food that they're interested in. We did cooking seminars and so forth. And I know each of our campuses have approached this in similar but unique ways according to local needs, and I support that all the way. And at Fresno, we were blessed with having a lot of ag leaders who were alumni, and they would donate fresh produce to us, and so we used our assets there. But I've found over the 6-7 years that we were working on this that I think if you ask the students, they would say that there was very little, if no, stigma attached because of the way in which we were able to organize and support according to what they shared with us.
Thank you. The next question is for Chancellor Castro. Is there a way to create more of a sense of community among faculty on different campuses? We've had a taste of it with some CEETL programs, including faculty from Sonoma State. It is an important opportunity to support and gain insights from faculty in different geographic areas dealing with different anti-racist challenges in other parts of the state.
I would say yes. I think each of the 23 presidents is open to new ideas, and I'd encourage that. I know President Mahoney is always open to new ideas, and I have to say, this is a little bit of a commercial for her, but I served on that search committee for her, and I've served on 2 presidential search committees, and it happened both times, where at Chico and at San Francisco, where the community was very clear about what they wanted, and we selected a leader that aligned exactly with what the community said they wanted. So I know President Mahoney is open to these ideas, and other campus presidents would as well. And that's what I'd encourage any faculty member that had ideas along these lines.
Thank you. Could you speak more to the role of mentoring students through participation in RISCA, Research Scholarship, and Creative Works, and how that fits into your vision of the CSU?
Sure. Well, I found as a student myself just how important mentoring was at different times of my in my career, and actually just last night I served on a doctoral dissertation committee, which I don't get to do that very often anymore, but I did that in part because I remember a former university president while I was at Stanford rearranged his schedule to be on my dissertation committee. And so even though it's a crazy time, I said yes. And I think each of us has the opportunity to mentor in different ways. And I just want to encourage that. I've always found that I learn as much or more than those that I'm mentoring. And it's at different times in your life, and you gain different insights. And especially with so many first generation to college students that we serve, just demystifying what the university is all about as early as possible makes a huge difference in their success. And I've heard faculty members, share this with me as well, and students that, one experience like that could make the entire difference in the education of their students. So obviously, as chancellor, would support our presidents in doing whatever they can to strengthen mentoring programs across the system. And I know President Mahoney is a strong supporter of mentorship programs.
We're almost out of time for our Q&A, and I want to assure those whose questions do not get answered today that we will be sharing those with President Mahoney and Chancellor Castro. And we'll end on a final question from one of our colleagues here at SF State. How do we acknowledge and address that many of our students distrust a faculty that is predominantly white to create an inclusive environment when they can be perceived as systemically excluding Black, Indigenous, people of color from their own ranks?
It's a great question. Again, I start with my own experience. I had incredibly powerful teaching experiences with lots of different faculty members from different backgrounds. And I believe that in general, our faculty are very committed to supporting the success of our students. When they misbehave, I think it's important that we hold them accountable in the appropriate ways. And as I said earlier, I'm very hopeful that we can diversify our faculty in ways that will better reflect the rich diversity of our student body. And over time, my theory of action is that will reduce those instances, and we'll get to a place where students, all of our students, feel like they have that support from their faculty, and the faculty are invested in the CSU because it's the mission that drives them to want to be with us as scholars. Maybe President Mahoney want to add to that.
I think that was a wonderful question and a great answer. I would just add that we have to continue to invest in things like CEETL. And I appreciated the Provost's commitment to equity and excellence. And I've always really appreciated that that's embedded in the mission of CEETL. And so the kind of work that I know that Wei Ming is doing in our Jedi Pi series, and we have to invest in this and make sure that we better educate our faculty. I also think if we aggressively pursue diversifying our faculty, our staff and our administration, that also will be transformative. So I think we have to attack this from a couple of different angles.
Well, I'd like to thank you both, President Mahoney and Chancellor Castro, for being here. I know you're both extremely busy. And when we asked Chancellor Castro to be here, it was a bit of a moonshot, knowing it's the beginning of your new job with the CSU. So thank you so much both for being here. And I hope that, I appreciate all the remarks that you stated. Next, we have a short intermission that focus on RISCA, and then a panel led by AVP Smith with representatives from each college.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Frederick Smith, he, him, his pronouns. I serve as the Assistant Vice President for Equity and Community Inclusion. And I'm so happy to be with you this morning and to be able to partner with you and to illuminate the potential of partnerships between student affairs and academic affairs, and especially when it comes to topics related to anti-racism, equity, inclusion, and making sure that we all do our best to ensure that each of us, whether we're colleagues or students or administrators, all feel that we are welcome and safe and included on the campus. I am going to start the panel with introducing who is on it. What we've done in terms of how we'll spend the next 50 minutes or so is we've asked each of our panelists to share a 2-minute introduction, kind of the why and the what around what they're doing related to creating an anti-racist university in their particular parts of campus. We've decided to schedule the speakers in alphabetical order by first name. I will introduce them in just a minute. Following each of their opening statements, and there are 8 opening statements for about 2 minutes each, then we will focus on more focused questions and conversations related to topics, focusing on institutionalizing the weight of the work and next steps that we can all take as faculty and staff colleagues on campus. But first, our panelists, I'd like to introduce, and they will turn on their cameras in just a moment. Alex Hu, who's the Dean of the College of Extended Learning. Alvin Alvarez, who's the Dean of College of Health and Social Sciences. Bob Bonner, Assistant Professor, Management in the Lamb Family College of Business. Carmen Domingo, Dean, College of Science and Engineering. Celine Shimizu, Professor and Director, School of Cinema. Katinka Martinez, Professor and Department Chair, Latina and Latino Studies. Melissa Seeley, Scholarly Communication Coordinator with the Library. And Rob Williams, Associate Dean of the Graduate College of Engineering. So we'll start first with Alex, who will share an opening statement. Each panelist will introduce themselves, their pronouns, and then give their 2-minute statement. And then they will transition to the person who is following them. Alex.
Thank you, First Miss. My name is Alex Hu, Dean of College Extended Learning, he, him, his pronoun. I really appreciate the opportunity and honor to be on the panel. And first of all, I am here to learn more about how to be an anti-racist university from the distinguished scholar. And anti-racist challenge is not only important to the university, it is also a personal matter. I had experienced both discrimination and racism during my career. During that time, I was not fully aware how it affected me. However, I often felt like an outsider, felt like nothing I can do to change that, and it makes everything harder, both professionally and personally. That is why it's so important for me. I do everything possible in committing to an equitable and zero tolerance of discrimination work environment. At the same time, we strive to provide accessible education opportunity. I will continue to pay close attention in eliminating microaggression and provide resources for professional development. It will help us to keep our faculty staff more engaged. It will lead to a better service to support our domestic international students. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you, Alex. And now I'll transition to Alvin Alvarez, Dean of the College of Health and Social Sciences.
Yes, I'm on mute. The bumper sticker of the year, sorry. You know, Fred asked us to talk about why we do this work, and I think the best answer really isn't mine. I think it came from Amanda Gorman yesterday, who, if you were at the inauguration, I'm ready to vote her in as our next president, and I'm a biggest fan now. But the thing that she said was that really caught my ear is the phrase, you know, what just isn't always justice, right? And I think that resonates with me about why I do this work. As an immigrant who came to this country, the best part of this country is its aspirations, its ideals. And the hardest and most painful part of this country is some of the realities. And so I think what drives me and a lot of other folks is trying to reconcile that gap between our aspirations and our ideals. And that's why I think so much of what this country is, what this institution is unfinished, but with potential. To talk a little bit about what we're doing in HSS, we are trying to create and establish a framework for 3 different kinds of spaces that we think are important for racial justice. They're very distinct, they're with a different purpose, but they all complement each other, and I hope you can see some of that. And the 3 spaces for us at this point are creating healing circles first and foremost, learning circles, and then working circles, and they complement each other. Healing circles for us is a place where we can be our authentic selves. So many marginalized communities have to put on a face, and it's very hard to bring their real selves into predominantly dominant institutions, right? And so finding that space where we can bear witness to the traumas that we have faced currently as well as in the past, I think is an important part. You know, before we can do this work, you have to create safety. You have to acknowledge the realities of what already is, right? And I think that's vital. Before we go on the tightrope of creating racial justice, you need to create a safety net underneath you. And I think that's what Healing Circles are about. And we will be launching those this spring, as a matter of fact. But you also need learning circles, a place where people are wrestling with and better understanding, you know, what is racism? What is racism in my discipline? What does that look like in this country? What is the experience of that through the eyes of those who have been targeted persistently for hundreds of years? What is that about? And that drives the question of, you know, why do we do that? And then the other space too is the working circles. And that's the place where we actually deal with how do we envision a just university in terms of its policies, its practices, its curriculum, how we support staff, how we hire faculty, how we engage with students. And those three circles are distinct, but you can see how they hopefully intertwine and create a framework for racial justice. And I believe we're going to Bob next. Is that right? We're doing this? Yeah, thanks, Fred.
Hello, I'm gonna try to get this in 2 minutes. So, so I want to address the why and the how, and it's kind of be high level, I guess, in some ways. So I want to start with a quick story. Growing up, we used to plan where we would stop for gas and food from trips between Virginia and Texas. And I was explicitly told why. So this is me, you know, little Bob. I was explicitly told why, under no circumstances, we would stop in places like Biloxi, Mississippi. And I can draw a line from that experience to being on the job market and limiting my applications to universities that were either majority minority universities or in locations that were majority minority, or at least like very progressive. And so decades later, my construed reality and decision-making was filtered by my past experiences as a Black man raised in a Black family from the South. And so even if it meant reducing my job search process. And so a brief understanding of upper echelons theory, which is an area where I study, it suggests that executives and management act on the basis of the personalized interpretations of strategic situations. The act of wanting to become an anti-racist university is such a situation. And so we're bound as faculty, as staff, and administrators by our personal biases, experiences, and values. So our field of vision is limited by our orientation, which is our psychological factors and observable experiences. And then we further limited by how we create our construed reality, you know, how we are through the selective perception and interpretation of the situation, which ultimately leads us to our strategic choices. Okay, so in order for us to become an anti-racist university, we must acknowledge as our default executive orientation, so through everything that we've learned and experienced, that the university is itself founded in the image of and the service to certain populations, which is in particular white Anglo-Saxon, Protestant, cisgender, straight males, without the consideration of others at best and with the deliberate exclusion of others at worst. And so if through the work of critical self-reflection, we can acknowledge that at all levels of the university, so not just faculty and administration, but in some ways, even more importantly, staff and then even our students, given their proximity and their procedural impact, then we can begin the process of confronting all situations through the lens of anti-racism and more specifically through the justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And so we can move away from the deficit thinking of why would someone limit their job searches to universities with so many jobs are scarce, to a more self-reflective, what are the systemic issues that would lead someone to limit their job search, and how can I use my positionality to dismantle those systems so others won't feel compelled to make the similar decisions. And then I'm going to pass off to Carmen.
Thank you, Bob. And thank you for the opportunity to serve on or participate in this panel. My name is Carmen Domingo, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the Dean of the College of Science and Engineering. As such, I have navigated a space that is very challenging for women, and particularly for Black and Brown people. In the absence of working towards an anti-racist university, we will continue to not meet the needs, dreams, ambitions, and talent of many of our students. We need to reflect deeply on the structures that continue to be barriers, not only for our students of color, but for our staff and faculty of color too. To address this, we recently put together the COSI Task Force for Anti-Racism. This task force is a 12-member group consisting of students, staff, and faculty from across our college. They are charged with establishing short, medium, and long-term goals that will guide the college in developing anti-racist policies, practices, and structures that will lead to long-term change. This effort is complemented by many others throughout our college that are working on student training programs to increase diversity in STEM, changes in the curriculum so that it is more representative and inclusive of Black and Brown scientists, changes in pedagogy to decrease stereotype threat and increase a sense of belonging in the classroom. We're also creating opportunities to discuss, reflect, and learn about the experiences of our Black and Brown students, staff, and women, and in particular, women of color in the sciences. It is important that each and every one of us take time to learn, reflect, and work towards becoming anti-racist. Racism persists because we often do not see it in ourselves, in our institutional policies and procedures. We need to work at being anti-racist. It is an ongoing journey, and I'm pleased to see that many of us want to be on this journey. Thank you. Next is Celine.
I'm Celine Perenya Shimizu, professor and director of the School of Cinema. My pronouns are she and her. According to the decades-long studies by UCLA and USC, Hollywood is one of the most inequitable industries where 96% of the most widely seen films are made by white men. If movies teach us how to learn, live, and love, what we know comes from a very limited demographic. In the recent commission led by Anita Hill, their report describes the culture of bullying rampant since the film industry's very beginnings. Meanwhile, the medium of film remains one of the most powerful in popular culture. And I myself know no greater pleasure than making movies and interpreting them. As director of a top 20 film school in the United States, our students make films that reflect a particular world, a racial mise-en-scène where any frame of our campus is not without a person of color and not without inequality. This means that the School of Cinema at SFSU makes the films our industry needs. Therefore, as the ground from which our industry can transform by crafting new ways of working together, issues of equity, diversity, inclusion, and access are centrally urgent. Not only do we now have an EDIA committee, faculty and staff in the School of Cinema have twice annual retreats where we collectively authored syllabi statements that ease our students' anxieties about the industry they are entering. We acknowledge the inequity in order to confront it. We wrote rules of engagement that commit to the courage to confront the challenges of a multicultural university. During the pandemic, we program vigorously in the area of race, rebellion, and resistance in order to create community and build networks that center underrepresented voices, various career workshops to demystify and transform the industry, and something very special. We mine the archives of 60 plus years of student films to give our students today access to their ancestors and our special tradition of experimentation and social justice as they struggle to create alone and apart from each other. Cooped up in the pandemic, the work of cinema is made clearer, including equal access to the pleasures and turmoils of making movies and interpreting them. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Katinka Martinez.
Thanks, Celine. My name is Katinka Martinez. I'm a professor in the College of Ethnic Studies, specifically in Latina Latino Studies. And the College of Ethnic Studies grew out of a struggle against racism, against legacies of colonization, and against economic exploitation. Faculty who teach in the college are aware of this history and continue to be engaged in this struggle. In fact, last academic year, we sat down and collectively identified what our shared principles are and what guides our approach in working with students, working with our faculty, and working in our broader communities. I encourage people to visit the College of Ethnic Studies website to review this. It's ethnicstudies.sfsu.edu. And I just want to read a section of it, which states, with resistance and freedom at our core, we educate, create, and seek wisdom and knowledge in order to support and empower students to critically assess legacies of colonization and empire. With this foundation, students have the opportunity to become ethical, effective, social justice artists, activists, scholars, and empathetic leaders that speak truth to power. So as for why this is important to me, my PhD is in communication. I received this degree at UC San Diego, and an amazing communication department. But in addition to the communication courses that I took as part of the degree requirements, I also took 4 ethnic studies graduate courses in an amazing ethnic studies graduate program there that was in its first year, the first year that I was in graduate school. It was necessary for me to venture further than my communication coursework and my communication professors in order to be able to produce a dissertation that addressed the history and significance of the ethnic press in the United States. 2 ethnic studies professors were on my dissertation committee and wrote letters of recommendation for me as I applied to teaching positions, and really provided me with the kind of intellectual foundation, rigor, and support that I needed to really develop my dissertation into something that was meaningful for a broader community and that made an intervention in the histories of the press in the United States. So for this and many other reasons, this is why ethnic studies is important to me, and this is why the work of ethnic studies and its commitment and foundation in anti-racism is important to me. Now I'll pass it along to Melissa.
Thanks, Katinka. I'm Melissa Seeley, pronouns she, her, hers, and I am the library's scholarly communication coordinator, which means that I'm focused on developing and promoting more equitable scholarly publishing models. My approach to this work is informed by what I learned about information privilege when working with international scholars and students, as well as refugee youth in the Middle East. I believe that fostering universal access to knowledge must be an essential component of an anti-racist university, but we also need to go beyond that. The library and publishing professions are even wider than academia at large, and it is crucially important that we work to make these professions more inclusive and diverse, while also drawing attention to the ways in which the lack of diverse representation affects the work that is published, as well as the type of work that libraries invest our collections money in, which in turn shapes the type of work that our faculty and students read, cite, and build upon. To that end, I want to highlight 2 initiatives that my colleagues and I are engaged in to better integrate anti-racist frameworks into our work within the library. First, my team and I in the library's Digital Scholarship Center launched Black Lives Matter Wikipedia edit-a-thons over the summer to provide an experiential opportunity for learning about bias and how bias combined with access to knowledge shape our information resources. Our next edit-a-thon is actually tomorrow from 3 to 4:30 p.m. It's open to all SF State faculty and staff. So if you're interested, please do get in touch with me or my team at libdsc@sfsu.edu. Just a quick plug there. And the second initiative that I want to highlight is that a cohort of my library colleagues and I are participating in CEETL's Jedi Pi Institute this term, and we are using that as an opportunity to think about how we support our students throughout the research process, both through our information literacy sessions and our library research guides, and we are working to integrate anti-racist approaches into that work. Lastly, as I mentioned, the library profession is overwhelmingly white, and we are very cognizant of the need to hire, mentor, and retain and promote people of color within our profession. And so that is definitely a priority for us. And even in the context of layoffs and everything that is happening with the pandemic, we want to be very mindful of that moving forward. Thank you, and I will pass this off to Rob.
Thank you, Melissa. When I was growing up as a Black kid in St. Louis, Missouri, I learned the Temptations version of Silent Night. So when my white elementary classmates were told to sing Silent Night, I was quite confused at that point. I can give you numerous examples of how I legitimately and lovingly and intelligently learned one way to view the world, while my white counterparts were taught a very different worldview. But here's the concern. I was required to understand the white dominant culture. They were never required or motivated by society to learn a Black worldview. So such is the experience of Black and brown students and faculty and staff. We have to study the dominant culture to get in, to fit in, and to survive and thrive. But speaking for people of color, our position is that everyone needs to learn about us, because we have a beauty and a panache and a swag and an intelligent, scholarly, different view on the same thing. And as my dad would say, how can you understand me now if you don't know where I've been? Do you know where I'm coming from? So this brings me to the work we've done on this campus with diversity, equity, and inclusion in our faculty hiring. That's a university-wide committee. The facilitations of this committee gives you two choices. Look at our service, teaching, and research through the dominant lens, and sometimes conclude that it is not traditional enough, or look at it through the same buckets, or look at the same buckets through the lens and our experiences as people of color, and learn that we are looking you in the eye and saying that I'm ready for this tenure track position. So our work on DEI was about facilitating dialogues that gave each program and department agency over what diversity, equity, and inclusion meant to them, to you. It afforded you as faculty opportunities to think about your own biases in the context of hiring. And I think that the most important thing that it did, which I really think is critical, is that it encouraged respectful rules of engagement, of dialogue, and they were internally developed for engaging each other when there were power differences, both inherent or maybe assumed, known and unknown amongst the committee. Now I'll pass it on to Frederick.
All right, thank you all so much for your opening statements. We will shift to some focused conversations in just a minute, but what I wanted to share with everyone who is viewing this panel is that these are all examples of storytelling or counter narratives, which are an important piece of critical race theory. Critical race theory informs the work of the Division of Equity and Community Inclusion, of which I'm a part, and which reports to Student Affairs and Enrollment Management. And so I didn't get a chance to introduce myself, but for those of you who are not familiar with our area, we consist of a number of spaces for student, staff, and faculty, including Asian American and Pacific Islander Student Services, Black Unity Center, Dream Resource Center, Interfaith Programs Unit, LGBTQ Pride Student Life, and Latinx Student Life. In addition to the spaces that we have, we also facilitate co-curricular programs and events, and we love partnering with faculty to bridge and to make sure that students have a holistic student life on campus. We also provide trainings and presentations, whether it's in your departments or if you want presentations in your classrooms as well. So please feel free to connect with me and with our staff. Our programs and events for spring 2021 will be available on our website at the end of this weekend before classes begin next week. So on that note, I will transition to some of our smaller, more focused conversations. And so I'm going to start first with Katinka and Alvin, and speaking specifically about the idea of institutionalizing becoming an anti-racist university. And so I'm wondering for both of you, if you could share some of your thoughts around what is important around institutionalizing, becoming an anti-racist university. For each of these focused conversations, I just want to add to those of you who are watching, we'll spend about 5 or 6 minutes on each one of these conversations so that we're mindful of time as well. So Alvin, Katinka.
Katinka, you want to go first or?
Oh, sure. So it's really great to be all together again. Thank you, Brian, Weiming, and Jackson for bringing us together. The last time I think that we were all together was in the annex talking about SF State's identity as the city's university. And I kind of want to revisit that and argue that we can stay committed to that project, and that project of the city's university can coexist and complement this dedication to being an anti-racist university, but only insofar as we really think about how we're connecting to the anti-racist work that's being done in the city of San Francisco. So are we in conversation with environmental justice movements that are recognizing the intersection between racism, poverty, and pollution? Are we connecting with organizations and community groups that are pursuing alternative models to community safety that don't rely on police? Are we part of coalitions that are challenging displacement and gentrification and working to secure tenant protections? Are we confronting corporate development that doesn't serve the needs of the poor and low-income residents? And many faculty are addressing these issues in their classrooms and in their community engaged scholarship. And many, at least in ethnic studies, our community service learning classes are engaging with these organizations and are committed to these efforts. But my question is, do senior SF State administrators address these issues when they have the ear of city leaders? And when SF State administrators do have the ear of city leaders, are they addressing the Bay Area's high cost of living? So what I'm saying is being anti-racist means supporting underrepresented faculty and first generation students as we struggle to survive in this city, in this area, in the Bay Area, the country's most expensive city to live in. So that's one thing that I would want to address. I also have a few more points related to AB 1460, related to the HSI status of this university. Alvin, do you want me to continue or do you want to chime in?
Up to you. I'll follow your lead.
Okay, I'll continue.
Go for it. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, as far as AB 1460, so this is the bill that requires that students graduating from a CSU in the 2024 and 2025 academic year complete an ethnic studies class as part of their graduation requirements. So my question is, how is SF State prepared to support AB 1460? So we've seen how emboldened white supremacists have become over the last 4 years, and how normalized and easily accessible racist ideologies and movements are. So how is SF State prepared to support faculty who have students in their classes that view AB 1460 as a conspiracy that is part of this, quote, great replacement? Is SF State thinking about that? Is that on their radar? How will they be supporting faculty who do address anti-racism in their classes? Another thing that I also want to address is the fact that SF State is a Hispanic serving institution. That's a federal designation that's given to universities that meet the requirement of having at least 25% of their student population comprised of Latinx students. So my question is, how is SF State demonstrating that it's truly a Hispanic serving institution and not simply a Hispanic enrolling institution? Because there's a significant difference. The number of Latinx first-time full-time freshmen enrolled in fall 2019 was 1,678. That's 45% of the first-time full-time freshman population, while the number of Latinx tenure-track faculty hires in 2019-2020 was only 3. So that's 10% of the hires. If we look at the ratio of Latina professors to Latina students, that's 1 to 102. So for every one professor, Latina, there's 102 Latina students. So as an anti-racist Hispanic serving institution, we would be prioritizing hiring faculty that reflect student demographics. I noticed that in the chat earlier, there were questions about staff experiences. And so one thing I would want to add is, how is the workload of Latina staff impacted if they're the only people in a unit that Latina students feel comfortable approaching? Now, the limited number of Latinx faculty and staff that are actually employed at SF State provide the university with volunteer services by organizing events such as Spanish language orientations for parents of new students. So what would it look like if the university prioritized hiring culturally responsive bilingual staff that were dedicated to supporting the university's significant Latinx student population? And what would it look like if Latinx students' cultural and linguistic knowledge was valued and supported by the institution in a welcoming manner? So those are the 3 points that I kind of wanted to hit. I'm not sure if I've exhausted all our time. Could Alvin say a couple things?
Alvin, if you have a few things that you would like to add before we move to our next question. Yes.
Thanks, Fred. So I think this question of institutionalizing an anti-racist university is really central to our work here. And what I see throughout many institutions, not just higher education, is a real diversity approach. And I want to really interrogate that approach, right? It's this notion, particularly in higher ed, of, let's hire more people of color, let's hire more Black faculty, let's hire more Black staff, let's recruit more Black students and community students of color. And I think that if we rely solely on a diversity approach, then this goal of ours is going to fail. Diversity by itself is not racial justice. And I think the truth of that has been born for the last 50 or so years, right? And, just bringing more people into the house does not create racial justice, right? And the reason for that is really obvious. As I grew up, when you invited people to your house, what's the first thing you did? You clean your house. You clean your house. You look inward. You see what's going on. You look at, yourselves. You look at the house. You see what needs cleaning. You look at your courses. You look at your syllabi. You look at your hiring. You look at your websites. You look at the whole house. And so there needs to be an inward look as well as an outward look. One of the things we hear, especially since this summer in the BLM movement, is that, we need to fix the system, and that we need to fix broken systems. And the filmmaker Ava DuVernay really caught my ear one night when she said, you know what, the system isn't broken. It's working exactly the way it is. And many systems are doing that just as they were intended to do, and higher education is no less immune to that, right? So here's a little history lesson, right? If we anchor the founding of higher education to this country with the founding of Harvard in 1636, right? So that means higher education has been with us for 385 years, 385 years, right? But for the majority of those years, and not until 1965 in the Higher Education Act, did we actually begin to really break down barriers across race, across gender, across socioeconomic status, right? Until that point in time, higher education was actively excluding, intentionally excluding many segments of our community, right? So think about that for a moment, right? That education has been broadly accessible in large part only within our lifetimes, 56 years or so, right? And so, systems like the CSU, systems like the community colleges have been born out of a struggle against that. But make no mistake, the system historically has been designed to exclude many communities, right? And so if the system isn't broken, what you really need to do is to interrogate what the system already is, right? And it is like Amanda Gorman had said earlier, we need to interrogate what just is and reimagine what could be. And so let me stop there and make sure other folks have some comments.
Thank you, Alvin. So we're going to move on. We have two more focused conversations to get through. So for the next two groups, if you can really be mindful of the time, we have about 6 minutes total for each question. So thank you. So the next group, Melissa, Bob, and Alex, can you speak to some of the weight of the work to become an anti-racist university? What are some of the challenges? What are some of the joys, etc.? So Melissa, Bob, Alex.
Do we want to go in that order? I can just start and I'll
Let's
try to
start.
keep it
Yes,
brief.
thank you. Thank you.
Okay, sure. So something that we talked about in our planning meeting is an example of cultural taxation. I'm the only member of this panel who is not a person of color. And I want to acknowledge the fact that as a white faculty member at San Francisco State, there has never been an expectation for me to engage in anti-racist work. I had the choice to do so and I made that choice, but I think there needs to be that expectation on all of this, on all of us here. This needs to be shared work and it needs to be shared equitably. I know I'm in a profession that's dominated by white women, and I know very well by talking to my colleagues that we are all very attuned to sexist microaggressions. And so I know we have the ability to see those microaggressions and to understand what microaggressions are, but we need to change that lens and we need to practice so that we can better understand racist microaggressions and macroaggressions and understand how our systems on this campus reproduce them. And so I just want to put that call out to all of my white faculty colleagues and staff colleagues on this campus, you know, that it's our work too, and we need to proactively seek out that work.
Yeah, so I can kind of piggyback off of that. I don't really have too many remarks that are prepared because I want to work off that. So yeah, I think it's often kind of the paradox of being a faculty of color where you want to help, and because you see the injustices, because it's just very transparent, right? There's no appeal to tradition for me, because I assume my null hypothesis is that everything that we do, all the systems that we have in place, including my own practice, probably has a little bit of discriminatory practices in it. And so I have to consistently self-reflect. And anytime I see a policy or procedure, I say, what's the basis of that? And I just question it, you know, and poor Tom, our department chair, has to go through that with me. And I say, well, I just don't buy it. Why is this? Anyways. And so in doing that, and part of culture taxation, in order for us to get to a anti-racist university, and I think someone maybe mentioned this, including the president, that we have to start finding ways to reward that type of service and that type of taxation in ways that can lead to sustainability in that way. And so just for the interest of time, I'm going to pass it to Alex and then maybe jump back in. So.
Yeah, thank you. I just want to share a thing, you know, based on in terms of becoming an anti-racist university, because College Extended Learning, we serve primarily non-matriculate students. We serve international students, we serve a professional adult, which the average age is 35. So often, not only San Francisco State, we typically label student, right? You're a matriculate student, you're a non-matriculate student, and you're an international student. For me, we work really hard across all the college. Thank you for the dean support. Try to get away from that. You are San Francisco State student. And the problem has been not every student receive the same type of services and support. So I think one thing for the university is really from the vantage point, how do we eliminate that? Because it's very difficult for the student who just come from maybe abroad and realize, oh, to the office, and they just say, yo, oh, you go to CEETL, you go somewhere we can help you. That have tremendous negative impact by not doing more holistic approach. So I think working to get across the board and the different division to really examining what we do and to support the student as a whole, especially we are City University. I completely embrace that idea. The student we serve right now on campus is really the tip of the iceberg. There's so much more we can do. But until we figured out how we can better support those students, it's the services to bring them to San Francisco State when we talk about anti-racist university. So that's one thing. Like I think College Extended Learning continue try to work hard, and with student affair across division, we try to eliminate those process, there's the procedure, those policy to really focus on how we are a broader university, serve all different parts of population. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex. And so what we need to do, right? Well, yeah, we are running low on time. We are just going to touch the surface on many of these. So I hope that in some of the smaller work groups this afternoon, we can continue conversations on some of these topics. But to bring it home about next steps, being unfinished, I'd like to ask Rob and Carmen and Celine to share their thoughts into next steps around faculty development, where we need to go next.
Rob, do you want to start?
I'd be happy to. Good morning. I'll be kind of quick. I want to start with just briefly a worldview perspective. MLK Jr., who we celebrated recently, talked about the story of the Good Samaritan, and the upshot of that story was that he was asking the folks who passed an injured person, asked, "What would happen to me if I were to help this man?" And likewise, it's that same question worldview-wise, is what would happen to me, my research program, my tenure progress, my teaching, my time, if I were to help this student, if I were to learn these things? And a different worldview from this Good Samaritan approach was, if I help this man, what would happen to this man? What would happen to him? And that's a very different worldview than the first one that I offered to you. The other thing that Martin Luther King offered in this book, Why We Can't Wait, is wait means never. It is time to stop planning and strategic planning and developing visions about how we're going to do this thing, and we must just do it. The urgency is not of the moment, the urgency is of the movement, which has been going on for 400 years for Black people, for people who are Native Americans and Indigenous people, for Latino, Latinx people, as well as for Asians. In this country, we have to do something now. It's about action and not about planning.
I'll just follow up on that, on the sense of urgency, and also this sense of inward looking, that we need to fix our home. And so I'm echoing Alvin's earlier words, that this is something that really is going to involve all of us. And this goes back to Melissa in terms of cultural taxation. That this really is going to take faculty training, and it isn't just those who have been negatively impacted by institutional racism, but it really is training of all of us to understand the barriers to the success of students in our university. Lastly, it has to be rewarded. So this is echoing Bob's comments. We've had many discussions around service load, and that many of these things are not rewarded in our RTP process, or at least in some colleges. I know ethnic studies really does reward service activities in their college. So if we want institutional change and we expect it from everyone to engage in this process, we also have to have mechanisms to reward it. Celine.
Our work on anti-racism in the School of Cinema enables me to ask bigger questions about inclusion. You know, our school is 1,100 students and about 50 faculty. During this pandemic, we collaborated with DPRC in ensuring our programs are accessible. How about the hard of hearing and the deaf when we conduct our webinars? I also began a conversation with our colleague, Professor Ting Su, in the program on visual impairment, to think about the hard of seeing and the blind. So if equity is about making sure there are no obstacles for full participation, then this means everyone has a place in the movies, on and off screen, on scene and behind it, which means everyone should have equal access to making culture and impacting all of our lives. The second thing is we need to acknowledge the ongoing, ever-changing, and ever-confounding work of anti-racism. While it's not easy, it is fulfilling for contributing to a better day. As we commit to equity, diversity, inclusion, and access work, we need to remain unafraid to welcome how people will come forward with issues of racism. And this is important to celebrate, even if we're working through how hard it is, because these experiences of pain, these relations of contention, for them to be out means we are transforming. For this to come open means we can work together to create better cultures. And lastly, I am so grateful to make use of the various offices and experts on our campus. I'm thankful to CEETL and the Division of Equity and Community Inclusion and the leadership there, for they generously and tirelessly help us in the School of Cinema, informed by their own experiences and their committed attunement to students who are forcefully marginalized and underrepresented in our society and in our university. Handing it over to Fred. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Everyone who participated this morning, Alex, Alvin, Bob, Carmen, Celine, Katinka, Melissa, and Rob. It was a joy for me to at least touch the surface of this conversation with you. And I hope that as you all continue your conversation today in smaller work groups, you'll have the opportunity to expand further. And I also saw there's some very rigorous chat and questions in the Q&A that I know at some point we will get to today. So now I am going to turn this back over to Wei Ming. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you all of our panelists and our facilitator for the panel, Fred Smith. Thank you all for your important work. If I may be permitted to read our virtual room, I think there is a collective will that we continue this powerful sharing of ideas and practices through a campus-wide anti-racism task force. And I hope that's one thing that comes out of our work together today. Just to note that recordings as well as transcripts of the morning's proceedings will be available on this iLearn site within a week, hopefully within a few days. We will also continue to host the Research, Scholarship, and Creative Activities, or RISCA, showcase. Please feel free to continue to peruse that as well as to add to the showcase over the next year. Now we will be taking a short break and moving into the working groups, each led by SF faculty and staff, exploring specific ways to achieve our goal of becoming an anti-racist university. Please read through the descriptions on the iLearn site and select only one to attend today from 11 to 12:30. Please use the sign-up sheet in the description and join the Zoom via the Zoom link provided. We will not be returning after the working groups, so I will take this opportunity on behalf of my co-organizers, Jackson Wilson and Brian Newman, to thank you all for joining us today and for committing to doing this work, as Mr. Greg Castro says, to take care of the land and of each other. And let us now take action. As Yoda says, do or do not. There is no try.